What separates video games from other mediums of storytelling? Books do a wonderful job immersing you into a large universe, allowing you to fill in some space where the writers deem fit. Movies are remarkable at evoking emotion and feeling through mirroring real-life experiences with visuals that help you escape into another world. Shows do the same as movies, but with longer runtimes that help tell more complex stories and convey more textured characters. However, I think you can argue that the quality of shows usually doesn't reach the quality of films because the longer runtime usually requires more resources to reach certain heights. Video games borrow a lot from the other mediums I just mentioned, as they all eventually borrow from each other. Games will often have their own universes with lots of lore to read. Games have very direct forms of storytelling with well-acted scenes that evoke a lot of emotion out of people. A lot of games have stories that are told over a ridiculously long period of time. But I think what truly separates video game storytelling from the other mediums I just mentioned is the amount of involvement each individual has whilst playing through these experiences. Environmental storytelling is the art of arranging a careful selection of the objects available in a game world so that they suggest a story to the player who sees them. I just read a definition from GameDeveloper.com. But environmental storytelling is a very common topic among people who consume stories in video games. There is a lot to be taken from an environment you're able to freely explore. And I don't just mean that open world games are rich with this subtle form of narrative. Games that are more linear can also do a phenomenal job telling the story through these subtleties. Different destinations tell different stories through changing environments, an environment that reflects the characters' motivations and personalities, NPCs that convey certain ideals through their animations or missable dialogue. And I think in a super well-structured game that's focusing a ton on storytelling, the character that you play as becomes a part of the environment. I've heard someone say that being able to move your character forward automatically makes you more attached to them. I don't know if I think this is entirely true, but it is a great way to put us directly into the lens of whatever character we're playing as. So much exposition in games is told as you're completing an activity. Maybe you'll learn very quickly that your character is super powerful because you're able to dismantle a large group of enemies in a combat sequence. It's very much play, don't tell, or show, don't tell, but through the lens of a video game. You can weave important dialogue through combat or puzzle sequences to make sure that the player is constantly stimulated. Sometimes the exposition is provided by you. Lots of characters that you play as in video games are created or altered by you. I think usually this sacrifices some narrative quality in favor for quantity because there needs to be so many different templates to be able to tailor a story towards you instead of having one concrete narrative. But I think that the flexibility and involvement makes it more than worth it in lots of cases. This extends to games in which you have large choices that change the trajectory of the narrative that you're playing through. Something such as RPG storytelling could not be done in other mediums of storytelling and reach the same heights that it does in games. I've said storytelling a lot. I love digesting stories in so many different ways in the games that I play, but there is a constant for what is the most compelling to me personally, as there is for most people, and there's a constant for what I find the least compelling. When I say I dislike the story of a video game, it doesn't mean that I dislike said game. Borderlands 3 is a game with an absolutely atrocious story. I do, however, think the gameplay of Borderlands 3 is incredibly fun. I love Sekiro so much as a video game, and I've had so much fun across multiple From Software games. However, I don't like how reliant the narrative is on environmental storytelling. So what sort of stories do I like in games? Well, just as I love FromSoft games, I love games that are the exact opposite of everything that those games provide. I love Detroit Become Human, and I've had a ton of fun across Telltale games. I've heard many people say these aren't real video games. They're movies with decisions, but that involvement that you have, those decisions that you make, are what make it a game. Anyways, I love RPG storytelling, as I've mentioned, and that also falls under the umbrella of Choices Matter games. Having influence in a story so that the narrative is tailored around you, paired along RPG systems such as skill trees or gear progression, is incredibly fulfilling to me. I've even had a ton of fun digesting tiny breadcrumbs in an MMO environment over a long period of time. Even if it isn't what I'd consider to be the greatest form of storytelling, in those cases it's often supplemental to what I would consider to be a really fun game. Now, what I love most is when a piece of entertainment truly takes advantage of all of the strengths of the medium that's a part of offers. Some would say Elden Ring does this, less would say Death Stranding does this, but my favorite stories are within the most recent God of War games. They do everything exceedingly well that I've mentioned is a strength of video game storytelling, and the gameplay doesn't conflict with the storytelling, which is something that I appreciate a ton. Ludonarrative dissonance is the conflict between a video game's narrative told through the non-interactive elements and the narrative told through the gameplay. I again just read the first definition that I saw on Google. It's another thing that people bring up a ton when you're talking about video game storytelling, and it's extremely common in a lot of open world games. There's a huge threat, you must stop it. Nah, I'm just gonna like go do some side quests, thanks though. Having agency in more open games makes pacing incredibly awkward, and pacing is something that's incredibly important for stories that are trying to evoke a lot of emotion out of you. But low narrative distance isn't something I'd really bring up unless we're talking about a game that takes itself incredibly seriously. Resident Evil definitely doesn't take itself too seriously. And because of that, I don't care that Leon never gets infected, regardless of the amount of like sludge and zombie goop and stuff that's gotten into your wounds and into your orifices whilst you're playing through the game. Storytelling and art in general is incredibly complicated. Games are filled with storytelling on top of what makes them a game in the first place. And for some of those games, the storytelling is what makes them a game. So what makes video game storytelling so special? Most of the things that I just mentioned in this video.